Welcome back to the Hippie Martha Hormone Hour, where we reclaim our bodies with wisdom, intuition, and a little bit of science magic. I'm Ashley, your host, and today I'm sitting down with someone whose work reaches far beneath the surface of just mindset and stress management. Angie Yatsky is a registered somatic movement educator and therapist, certified movement analyst, and dynamic embodiment practitioner with 30 years experience in movement and movement education. Backed by neuroscience and grounded in hope, Angie helps all ages release body-held tension and trauma, repattern developmental movement, and rewire sensory processing. She specializes in birth trauma and developmental trauma and their impact on the developing nervous system. So if you've been doing all the right things and still feel tense, dysregulated, or hormonally stuck, this episode is going to open doors you didn't even know were closed. So let's dive in. Angie, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. I am so happy to have you and so glad that we were able to meet. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I always start with a little check-in, but I want to actually kind of share a little backstory of how we met. And we actually met back in September. We were both doing a 9 in, 9 out expo. And I was already thinking back to how you and your services could help my local clients. But then I thought, what a great idea to share what you do for those who don't live in Michigan and maybe they could find a practitioner in their hometown or their community like yourself. So that's kind of where this all kind of began and landed. But I want you to share just a little bit about what you do, where, just share your story first, and then we can maybe get into some more of the somatic therapy work.
Sure. So thanks for having me. Somatic is a word a lot of people aren't sure about. And if you Google it, it really doesn't describe what I do. How I like to talk about it is somatic is a big umbrella word for anything that has to do with body and brain. So the word soma is Greek for the living body. So somatic movement therapy means we're bringing movement in there, different than what usually people have heard of as somatic experiencing. Somatic experiencing is something you would do with a mental health therapist, where maybe you would sit across from each other and you'd have hands on your own body and you'd try to sense where tension is, where trauma is, and try to release it. So I'm actually moving people. So if you can see, I'm in my office. Behind me, I've got big balls. We have mats on the floor. I have a vibration plate and a mini trampoline, and we're moving. And movement is something that has always been a part of my life. So I started as a dancer and have a bachelor's and a master's in dance and choreography, and I taught for many years, and then went into movement analysis, working with both dancers and non-dancers, and then finally somatic therapy, which has been my favorite thus far. I love working with people. I have found so much of my own healing through somatic movement therapy that I didn't even have when I started the program. And it was actually working with people that things started to settle in my own body.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. I definitely feel that it's important to move that through, right? Like that energy or whatever you're feeling. So that's amazing. So what kind of people do you work with as far as, like this therapy?
I see all ages. So the youngest I've had is 4, and I think the oldest is 74. So all ages. I work with pregnancy, I work with postpartum. I see a lot of kids. I see a lot of moms in particular, families. And it's one of those things where I'm doing very similar work with everybody, but the approach is different based on circumstance. So we all develop movement first. So movement fires the brain for a baby, and that starts in utero. And then that is laying the foundation for the nervous system. So whenever I'm working with an adult, I'm going back to all those early movement patterns, which are simple words like how do you push and reach and pull, things like that. And we figure out what got stuck. So all ages, Kids are fun because I do a lot with obstacle courses and it's a lot of play, but I make the adults play too. Play changes the brain more than anything.
Yeah,
And I always
that's
say healing shouldn't be all tears and trauma analysis. We've got to have some joy in there as well.
yeah, 100%. I love that so much. I think at what point do people need both therapy and somatic therapy, or do you recommend trying this first to kind of get things flowing and moving versus, like, I guess what's the difference between just going to therapy and then what you do?
I would say everybody is a little different. So some people need to be talking it out, talking it out, talking it out. Some people don't. Some people dread the thought of sitting on a couch and talking about everything. So for those who do like to talk it out, I recommend in tandem. So if they're moving their body, if they're finding out where they're stuck, getting some rejuvenated energy in their bodies, they're probably going to talk more efficiently rather than just feeling stuck in the cycle. And I have people who come in here and that's what they want to do. They want to keep talking and talking. And I'm like, "Well, let's move a little bit." And then the talking starts to change and they recognize their own patterns a little more quickly. So I think that's what movement does is movement helps us see where we're stuck a little more quickly because
Yeah,
that's what came first.
that makes sense. When you see those patterns stuck, do you find that these movements help clear those patterns, or do they have to keep doing those movements in order to like keep working through it, I guess, to like stop the bad patterns? Is that something?
Yeah, I think the practice is good to build awareness, and then I think the awareness starts taking over. And I have 4 words that I always teach. So at any point I can throw those in and we can start moving a little bit
Yeah.
whenever you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I have just a few more questions
Yeah.
regarding kind of like the reproductive years or even in perimenopause. And from your perspective, how do stored trauma patterns in the body influence kind of that hormonal or reproductive stage? Like I know for me, I see a lot of patterns stuck on charts, cycle charts when they're monitoring their hormones and things like that. But how do you see it in clients with the movement pattern?
So we have protective responses in our bodies that are unique to each of us that go all the way back to birth and early childhood. So sweaty palms, racing heartbeat, stomach ache, anything like that. The brain goes 4 to 6 times faster than the body typically. So we'll start to get those little symptoms and the brain just takes over because the brain wants to keep us in survival mode and then the body is left in the dust. So once we start to feel those, when I work with someone, I have them name what do you experience, and then we get our little list together. So then the homework is when you start to notice that, being able to say, wait, this is familiar. I know this feeling. It probably has less to do with this situation or this person and more to do with my pattern of how I respond. I'm going to slow down. I'm going to notice. I'm going to get myself back to the present. And then I give a little bit of movement, that baby movement of the pushes and the pulls and the reaches that we practice to get unstuck. And then that practice slowly builds over time, especially if we practice those little actions in the good times. So for example, I talk about the reaching. And if you are reaching for your plate in the high cupboard, step back 3 inches and make yourself actually reach. And so the body is practicing, I can have a desire. I can want something. I can move towards something good, but I'm not going to sit and analyze and analyze and analyze. I'm just going to have my body start practicing that. And then pretty soon that action starts informing my nervous system and my brain starts slowing down a little bit.
That kind of answers my next question, which many of my clients feel very stuck in that fight or flight or freeze method.
Mhm.
And so just doing those little movements can help get them out of that. Is that what you're saying?
Mhm.
Wow,
Mhm.
that's crazy. I love that. I'm gonna
Yeah,
start trying that. Do
try
you
that.
do you want? Yeah, Do you want to show us like
Sure.
how that looks and what some of
Yeah.
that looks like?
Yeah. And I would say one more thing about that.
Yeah.
The brain, if you think about it, the brain is always keeping us in the future or in the past. We're either planning ahead or we're dwelling on something that happened, but it's movement that is in the present. And there's so much talk about be in the present, be in the present. And everybody says, I don't know how to be in the present. Well, it's actually movement. And it's, someone might say, well, I jog, I box, I do all these things. That's great, but it can be a form of dissociation where I let my mind just race and I'm doing these things, but I'm never really slowing down and letting my body feel, because that's what being in the present is.
That hits very hard because I struggle with that.
I do too.
I mean,
I'll
I think
do.
we all do, right? Yeah, we
Mhm.
definitely all do. And I think that slowing down can also help us to feel safe in our body, but sometimes when we slow down, we don't feel safe.
Yeah.
So, because we have so much distrust from, like you said, like our past or maybe what we've experienced or what we've gone through. Please show
Okay,
us
let's
some
do.
things.
I'm going to stand up. So that's another thing I like to always point out. I'm sitting on a big ball. So for people who work all day, I always, like at a desk, I always say sit on a ball, because that little bit of bounce, that little bit of rocking, that keeps you in the present during your workday or
Abs-
watching TV or anything like that. Okay, so babies have four movement patterns that they are cycling through all the time that are helping them form their nervous system. So babies yield, and by yield, think about I'm softening, I'm releasing, I'm relaxing. It's a little hard to show standing up, but if you're sitting in a chair, or you might even put your hands on your knees and your elbows on your knees and just soften, maybe deepen your breath a little bit. Babies have to figure out that yield. And so for some babies, that yield is really hard. If there was birth trauma, the part of the brain that is awake in utero can sense fear and remember fear. So babies can sometimes be born with these little nameless anxieties that they're not even sure why they exist. If someone had a rough beginning, those first 3 years are so formative. It can be hard for that baby to really soften into the parent or caregiver's arms. But that's ideal. This is what we want, is that yielding quality. That yield is what supports the push. So push, if you think about if you've ever had a baby or been with a baby, if I were lying on my belly right now and I'm pushing through my hands, and I have this little bit of awe and wonder as I'm looking around. And maybe I start rocking on my toes and I'm going a little forward and back, and there's a little excitement. This is your mojo. And so it's so funny because I always use the word mojo. And if someone is younger than I am, I'm 53, they don't know what mojo is anymore. Mojo is your fire, your drive, your get up and go. So this is baby and push. I've got that little bit of excitement. I need that push to be able to reach for that toy. I've got some things here to reach for that toy that I want that is just out of my reach. And I can take hold of it and pull, and usually it goes to my mouth, and there's a sense of satisfaction. And then I let it go and I fall back into my yield, that relaxation. And I start the cycle over. I'm yielded, I find my push, I'm excited, I look around, oh, I want something, I reach, I take hold, I pull, I claim it. It was great. And then I fall back into my yield. So if you think about the developing toddler, child, teenager, we all have unmet needs. Everybody has some unmet needs. So if you think about, I mentioned not being able to yield because maybe there wasn't safety. Maybe there was so much push in someone as they're growing up that it felt like hypervigilance, and they're looking constantly for threat, or it feels like I'm just always in a fight with that push. Or maybe the stuck happened in the reach where there's just this feeling of desperation all the time. And I can't see the good around me because I'm so worried about being enough and doing enough and reaching and reaching. And then sometimes we can be stuck in the pull. I take hold and I pull and I pull and I pull and I pull. because I don't know when the next good thing will happen. I work a lot with adoption, and we hear about food scarcity with kids, and there can be food hoarding, or maybe it's about a relationship. And I know this relationship isn't good for me, but I don't know if I'm going to have another one. So I'm just going to hold it and I will not yield. And so there's always that stuck point. And so by practicing these little actions, and I have my adult clients right on the floor, and we start maybe on the side, and then we find that baby push and we rock, and maybe I put little toys out and we have to reach and we pull it in, and there's revelation that comes. Oh, I remember this. I didn't even know that was still affecting me, and that makes so much sense. And then rather than getting stuck in that, maybe we need to let the tears flow, but then we keep moving a little bit, and the body gets rid of that stuck energy. You had mentioned, Ashley, that feeling of not feeling safe in the body. And that's where that push for me always comes in. So whenever I'm working with someone and I sense that lack of safety, or if I'm going to send them out the door and I know there will be a lack of safety, I'm always helping them find ways of pushing. So I don't know if you can see my hands, but I have a countertop here and I'm pushing into the countertop. It's great if you have a live person. So I will push hands to hands and we'll just have a little back and forth. Or I put my back against the wall. Feels really good if I have the big ball behind me and I have a little feedback into the ball.
Yeah.
But feeling that push, there's a word called proprioception, which is the ability to feel your joints and muscles, which tell you you exist. You know you are there. So when I'm feeling I'm not safe in my body, I have to let my mind keep going and going. That push will slow me down enough so I can, okay, breathe. What is familiar? Oh yeah, this is what I do. I run ahead. I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to look around. I'm going to scan for beauty rather than threat. I'm going to notice things, notice colors. I'm going to hear sounds. Right. Whenever I look side to side, I'm telling my brain I am in present time. Because like I said, the brain is either forward and back. And that happens in movement too. If I have a lot of tasks, I'm always forward, forward, forward. But if I can get myself to look side to side and notice, I'm immediately sending my nervous system a message that I am in present time. And these feelings coming up, I can probably name when they started. I don't need to right now. Right now, I'm going to work on my push. I'm here. My reach. I can reach and grab something good. I can claim it. And soften again. So it's that little cycle,
I love
which I
that.
think is so beautiful.
Oh my gosh, yes. And you know, like I said, I see a lot of cycles where our bodies won't ovulate because I work with ovulation and reproductive health and whether they're trying to get pregnant or not get pregnant or just help with their hormones. I see a lot of times where their bodies don't feel safe enough to ovulate. And that again, the brain controls that process. And so
Mhm.
this totally makes so much sense putting these two together because if your brain is feeling safe, like you said, if you go into that present mode, your body's going to feel safe. And if your body feels safe, then, you will ovulate, you will feel safe enough to ovulate, right? Like that's
Right.
the main goal of the cycle.
Right.
So I love that so much. Thank you. That was
Yeah.
really helpful. What do you do this same kind of structure for those who maybe feel numb or disconnected or disassociated? You just try to get them back into their present body by doing things like that. Is that the
So
goal?
they are different animals. The high anxiety feels very different in my office compared to the numb or the dissociated. But getting in the body is always the same. So I mentioned I have a vibration plate, and people always say like, "What do you do with this?" Because there's so many things you can do with a vibration plate. My only purpose is I have someone stand on there maybe 2 or 3 minutes just to remember you have a body and you let it shake a little bit. It
Yeah.
forces you to get out of your brain. And then I have a little mini trampoline. So usually, eventually we're getting up on that trampoline, and it's not meant to be a high risk action. But anytime you're working with trauma, when you have a mild stressor that is predictable and rhythmic, is really helpful for the body. So sometimes once we've worked up a little trust, the stressor is I have someone hold my hands and close their eyes for as long as they feel safe, just to bounce, and I'm bouncing on the ball a little bit, just to feel that, and then they open their eyes and look around. But that's telling the nervous system, oh, I can handle a little bit of stress, and I'm here and I'm okay. The other thing I do when I think about numbness and dissociation, I work a lot with abuse, sexual abuse in particular, which it's a high statistic of what comes in. I'm always surprised how high that is and saddened. And I do a lot with touch, and it takes a while to build up that safety. But how I do it, I believe, has been really helpful for those who feel unsafe in their bodies. And this is work that I have developed from all of my many teachers. One in particular, Dr. Annie Brook out in Colorado, who's a somatic psychologist. And I went through a birth trauma 2-year training with her. And so this is an idea that she developed probably through her teachers, but it's something I do where I have someone sitting and I'm sitting next to them. And I ask permission before I do any kind of action, and I'm only focused on the arm, but I say what I'm going to do, and then I do exactly what I say. So I'll say, is it okay if I squeeze your arm 5 times up to your shoulder and 5 times down? And because we're all people pleasers, I always say, take a second and just picture what that would feel like. And then usually it's a yes. And then I go very slowly. And the person's only job is to feel their back against the wall because they're probably sitting on the mat, and breathe and look around to know they're in the present time. And then I'll pause, and they get the opportunity to sense, did that sensation match what my brain told me? And if it didn't, we go even more slowly. So the next set of touches, I sometimes do little taps, or I do little swipes, or I do little pinches. So we might do a little bit on that arm, do a little bit on that arm. Maybe we do one thing on one arm, one day, and that's a huge victory. And there's something that can be settling when we slow this down enough to allow touch again. Because if we are going around so tightly held and gripped, and our body feels smaller and smaller, touch feels very unsafe. But when we can allow and find safety in that one part of the body, if we can get that one part to trust and soften, we have a better chance for the whole body.
Wow, that's pretty empowering, especially for someone, like you said, coming from that situation and just trying to reconnect, just even with their own body. I think we are often told to listen to our bodies, but if someone has a history of trauma or dysregulation, that can often feel pretty terrifying. How do we earn back that trust? Is it just by working with someone, but doing those little things to kind of earn back our own trust and just being within our bodies and being present?
Yes, yes. So I talk about 2 words, trauma and shock. And, we hear so much trauma in the body, trauma in the body. I still like to believe that trauma is the event that happened. What's left over in the body is the shock. And the shock is what keeps surfacing, always that shock. Those are those little sweaty palms, racing heart, tight muscles. So that building of trust doesn't happen until we're able to separate the two. So that when we say trauma, when I'm talking about trauma, I can feel safe. If I'm safe with a counselor or a good friend, I can talk about the trauma. With shock, that's the overwhelming, I'm so flooded, I can't even find myself feeling. So to regain that trust, we have to start getting on top of that very first sensation that starts to come up. Oh, I felt that tightening. Okay, no, pull that train back, look around, push, recognize that this is my shock pattern. Do not let myself go back into the trauma, re-traumatization of it all. While you're thinking, let me add one thing, because I want to be clear that it doesn't mean it never gets talked about. Like, oh, we're just going to move and everything's going to heal. So what I say in here is we need to name it. We need to name what happened while we stay in present time, while we push, while we move, while my hands are on you to release some of that stuck energy, we still have to name it.
Yeah, I thought of it. And do you find that people come to you and just don't know how to name it, or they don't think that they have trauma or that shock, but it is, they might not think of it because of maybe what their lived experience is, but you look at it from like, oh no, this is what it is, but then you just kind of go through it with them and help them complete that cycle, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think I've seen several styles come in the room. They're pretty aware and they know, I know this happened to me. And as we do the patterns, I know I get stuck here. And last week I worked with a woman who, very first time in here, just so many tears. And she said, I don't even know where to start. And I said, we don't even have to start with words. Let's just do some things to get a little safety in your body. And that's all we did for that whole first session. And we even laughed a little bit, which surprised her. But that's what movement does because it's play.
Yeah.
And then I've also worked with people you can physically see the tension in the body and it's masked by politeness or an eagerness, but it's a resistance, it's an armor. And sometimes that's the hardest one to break through. One thing I talk a lot about is forgiveness. So I'm a believer that yes, the trauma happened, and yes, there's shock residue. That shock residue is comprised of a lot of unforgiveness. And when it was big trauma, that can spark a lot of, what do you mean forgive? But I'm a person of faith and I work with a lot of people of faith. I don't push it, but forgiveness goes both secular and faith. When we hold that in our bodies, it's not doing us any favors. We build up this wall instead of having a boundary. We want to have good boundaries, but we don't want to have that wall. And there's so much research now of things that happened to us when we were little, 30 years later, causing a lot of sickness in the body. So we want to be able to let that go.
Yeah, I see that a lot with my perimenopausal clients too. And a lot of it is kind of that stress or the type A personality where they have to do it all. And then by the time they are in perimenopause, they are totally burnt out and their body is just tired and done and it doesn't know what to do next. And they come to me and they're like, I'm not right. Like, what is going on? And so I really feel like a practice like this could be very helpful in just one, acknowledging them to slow down, and two, to just be present in their body and not always have to do something, but also that movement can kind of help complete that, right? Like it's just really, it can be really transformative for them.
And even recognizing in perimenopause, menopause, recognizing what I'm feeling right now, it had a root. Let's name that root and have compassion for our younger self and see how that can shift. So can I do another exercise?
Absolutely. Yes, please.
One little exercise I like to do is babies have a reflex called extensor thrust and flexor withdrawal. So it just means to extend or to flex. And you'll see it in their feet. Like if you tickle a baby's foot, they might pull it back or they might kick it out. So I like to, and again, this is from my teachers, but I like to have a client put their hand right here and I give a little scratch on their palm. And as soon as they feel me, I want them to push out quickly. And so we practice that action. And I'm not giving a lot of the why just yet. I'm trying to get a little bit of energy in their body. And then we do the opposite. I scratch here and it's like a hot stove and you pull it back. And then I might squeeze, and shake their arm and have them push into me a little bit. And they'll say, how does that arm feel? Oh, it feels more relaxed or it feels more alive, or there's always a good feeling with that. And then I talk about, we know about fight or flight. Fight or flight is good. We need the fight to protect ourselves. We need the flee to be able to get out of danger. But when we don't use it, we freeze. And so then we have all this frozen energy of all the times we wish we would have fought and we wish we would have fled. It stays in the body and they stack and they overlap. And then we get a burst of energy and we do more, but We just keep stacking all that. When we do the second side, I talk about now I want you to imagine all that frozen fight energy. You are pushing it out of your body. You are capable now. So, to use myself as an example, you're 53 now. Whatever happened to you at age 10, you can now fight back. You can protect. And we make it fun. Same thing here. You can get out. I talk about this with negative talk, self-doubt. Get out of that. Get out of that. And we let the body feel that change.
That's amazing. I read a book by Emily Nagoski called The Burnout, Resolving the Stress Cycle. And she talks about how we need to complete the stress cycle in some way. So even if we have like a stressor that day, or like even this podcast, like I know for me, it's not a bad stressor, but afterwards I will just like shake out and jump out just to kind of relieve those sensations, right? Do you have like any specific things that you recommend to complete the stress cycle? So for instance, if someone maybe got in a fight or got in a car accident, or just had a moment with like a coworker or a child or something, what is a good way to complete that stress cycle, or to get that movement in?
Yeah, what you mentioned is great. Actually, the shaking, always good. There's a whole modality. I think it's called TRE. Can't remember trauma response. I'm not sure. I'm not going to say it.
That's okay.
But it's all on shaking, and they shake and shake and shake. I don't do that, but shaking is always great. Bouncing is great. That push again. The other thing I say is when that happens, the body is getting smaller, 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 smaller. What can you do to make your body feel bigger? Just take up as much space as you can. So there's an imaginary, they call it a kinesphere around your body. So if you picture, see my little boy here, this gets bigger. If you picture your body inside this, everywhere you can reach is your kinesphere. So take up as much space as you can in your kinesphere so that you feel less controlled by your brain.
I love that. Thank you. I think just giving like little tools to people can really help them. And then obviously being able to work with a practitioner and kind of get even better results can be really helpful. Oh, this is the last question, I think. Let me go through this. We've answered a lot, so thank you. This has been really insightful. How can we tell the difference between relaxing and regulation? So like relaxing, people will say, "Oh, I just relaxed. Like I was just, watching TV, or I had like a Netflix and chill." Like, to them, relaxing, but is their body really regulated, or is that stress cycle still going in their body? What's the difference, and how can they tell the difference, I guess?
I think it's really how do you feel after? If you watch Netflix, if you're scrolling, I'm sucked into it as well. When I finish, do I feel better? No. And I think, oh, I just lost time out of my life. So I had a client say, this was a teenage boy who I thought, oh, this is sad that a teenage boy has to tell me how to stop scrolling. He said, I know if I start, I won't stop. So don't start. That was brilliant.
That is brilliant. Very
So
insightful.
the regulation bit is, what are you doing to slow down and stay in the present? And scrolling and Netflix and all those things, really, they are dissociation. I'm not saying it's bad. We all
know absolutely.
But it is dissociation. It's getting us out of our own lives in a form of escape.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the answer, but usually it's probably not. I have more props I brought over. Do you want to see a few things?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I brought this out a second ago. This is my breathing ball. Some people have seen these. It grows. This one happens to light up a little bit. Breathing, I don't teach, there is such a thing as breath work. I don't really teach anything like breath work, but I do talk about how every cell in the body needs oxygen, which means every cell has to get bigger when you inhale and smaller when you exhale. So I will practice this with clients just to get that visual of how do I get bigger rather than just breathing and not letting any change happen in my body.
Yeah.
So I love that for that. The other thing I have is a 3-pound weighted ball. And so I use these with all ages to toss back and forth because it brings in that proprioception. I gotta really wrap my mind around the fact that this is 3 pounds. So if I'm talking with someone who's really fast in their brain and they're kind of stuck there, this is one way I will bring the body in without them even realizing I'm slowing them down. I'm respecting their need to talk, but I'm also trying to get the body in there. So we toss this back and forth. But this is a great thing for kids too. If anybody has kids at home who are highly anxious and you're trying to have some conversation, but they're stuck up here, toss that ball back and forth.
Yeah.
Speaking of kids, but it's also a nice thing for husbands to do for wives. And I say that because husbands are notorious for wanting to fix everything, and wives sometimes don't want that and they just want them to hear. And then there's some of this. But kids, when there's a behavior and parents want to lecture or help them understand what was wrong, help them get a little more regulated rather than just get their mind to work, because really this isn't going to develop till they're 25. So if they're already dysregulated, they're not going to hear your words. So one thing I love to teach parents and husbands is to, with permission, put a hand on the front, right at the clavicle here, and a hand at the back. And it's like you're just containing all the chaos. And so someone is standing next to me, holding all my chaos in, and I can close my eyes or I can look around a little bit, but I feel a little more co-regulation with this person, which is really nice. Yeah.
I feel like that one is especially good for the holidays, like holidays are coming up and yeah, you need that co-regulation. I know for me, especially the holidays are very triggering. And so my husband is very good at helping me co-regulate, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. That big bear hug squeeze is great.
Yep.
This is my stress ball. It has some air out of it because when we can't feel ourselves, you can push or you can just squeeze the daylights out of a partially deflated ball. It's a nice way to bring yourself into the present. So props are great. And then I talk a lot about the feet because I believe that fight or flight, after it's going through the body, it all falls down and sits in the ankle. I have no idea if this is scientific or not, but I noticed that when I work on people's feet and work on their ankles are so tight and we don't have much awareness of our feet. And yet there's all this talk about grounding, walk in the grass, buy grounding sheets. Well, if we can't feel our feet, we're not going to do much good. So to even sit on your own and work on your ankle, work on your foot. And then I have these little soft baseballs. If it were a softball, I think it would be bigger. So I think it's actually called a soft baseball to roll under your foot while you're sitting and just feel that little release in the foot, little pressure point. And while that's going, I'm working with clients on, we might stand and I'll have it under one foot. I'm working on, okay, your foot's got that going on. Can you feel some freedom in the rest of your body? You're letting one part of your body be very focused. You don't need your whole body to be focused and single vision. You can have one part working and let the rest of you. So that's a nice thing for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the wintertime when it's freezing out and you can't get outside.
Right. And then I have one more fun thing to show. This is, I had a young woman take my training. I do a training for mental health therapists, and we did a barter instead. She crocheted me this little doll.
Oh, I love that.
And a pelvis and an umbilical cord.
That is
And
awesome.
boom. It's so great.
I might need her name.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. And what's so great about this is you had mentioned, the cycle and the tension. And what we forget about is that we were all babies in a womb. Everything that came through that placenta went straight into here. And so it wasn't just food. It was all the emotions, all the hormones of our moms. So if you picture, that can be a pretty tense area that we grow up with. And we don't even realize that it could have started way back when. So to be able to slow down, put a hand on our own belly and breathe into those places. Maybe you have a person with you so that there's some co-regulation, but to name some of those things, but think about where that tension could have localized that might be affecting you now.
Yeah.
And then saying, all that came into me, that wasn't mine. I don't need to hold on to that. Maybe you say, my mom did the best she could with what she had.
Yeah.
And I'm going to release her of that. and you do a little self massage there and you work on that for a few
Yeah.
days. See if you can let that go.
There's only so much that we can control.
Mhm.
And I think just going forward and learning techniques like this and working with providers like you can be really just very, very helpful in just understanding and then learning how to like manage and handle it and allowing those things to just because you don't need to hold on to all of that. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much. I guess the last question is, how does one find a similar practitioner? I know you have lots of training and lots of years under you, but you had stated of working with someone in Colorado, so
Mhm.
Boulder. So what, like, is there like a group of practitioners that you follow or that they could get in touch with you maybe? Do you do online work at all or
I
virtual?
will. I don't do a
Okay.
ton, but if it's someone out of state, I definitely will because
Yeah.
there's not a lot of option. Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
they can reach out to me at Angie at
Okay.
bodyredeemed.com and I can see who I can help them find.
Yeah.
Annie Brooke, who I mentioned, Dr. Annie Brooke, she's in Colorado, Boulder. There are a few practitioners sprinkled around the United States. There's an organization called ISMETA, ISMETA.org, and you can do a national search. I think it's international. It stands for International Somatic Movement Education and Therapy Association. So you can search. All practitioners are a little different. So it's really, asking the right questions according to what you might need. Do you need a little bit more movement? Do you need a little bit more talking? Everybody has a different focus, but that's a good resource to start.
Thank you. And we can post that definitely in the show notes as well. So I'll get all of
Okay.
that information from you, post it in the show notes, and then please feel free to reach out to Angie. Honestly, I want to bring my whole family to you.
Yay.
I think we all need a little bit of information and work. So thank you so much, Angie, for being here, sharing your wisdom, sharing your movement, sharing your ideas of how to really just be present. And yeah, I really appreciate it. So we're going to end here. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.